There's still some of these bears left, so I thought we'd have up here. It truly is my honor to be with all of you this morning, and that's not just because I flew in from Chicago, where it's about 40 degrees colder than here. It really is my honor, and just listening to some of the honorees, I think this really is a very, very special occasion. I wish there was more cities, more areas that started off with the Pledge of Allegiance and prayer and focused not just business, but business and ethics. And so I give everybody a round of applause for just an amazing, amazing event. I actually spent a number of years at Baxter, a global healthcare company. I went there for 2 years as a financial analyst. I forgot to leave, and I was there for 25 years, not thinking I'd ever be the CEO of the company. But far more important than that, when I was graduating from Northwestern, I was a recipient of a lot of scholarships and a lot of fundings. I didn't have the money. And when I graduated, Don Jacobs, who was the dean of the school, who actually ended up paying some of my tuition, I said, goodbye, I'm out of here. I'm going to work for Baxter. He said, you're not going anywhere. You ended up receiving all these scholarships, so I have a license on you. So the day I left Baxter 15 years ago, he called me that day and he said, I want you to teach. And I said, I'm not a teacher. I run companies. And he said, I think you said you would do whatever I told you to do. He thought I was going to do finance because I had been a CFO at one time. And I said, you have all these brilliant PhDs. I got an MBA. I can't compete with these people. He said, what do you want to do? I said, the world we're living in, and this was 15 years ago, we need more value-based leaders. We need more people that understand why we're on this earth and what we're doing. He said, that sounds great. You start in 2 weeks. You better get a syllabus together. And so I've been teaching now for 15 years, and any of you that have been involved in teaching know you really don't understand anything until you can explain it to somebody else. So I am very, very blessed to focus on values, leadership, ethics, what really matters. And I can't think of a better combination to talk about than being a Catholic leader. Now, I know we have a lot of Catholics in the room. I think the problem we sometimes have, and I'm always very open, very direct, a lot of very, very strong Catholics, we sort of have this view of, hey, that's really important to us. That's why Jesus came to this earth. That's why we're here. But you know, this church-state thing, you know, we kind of have to separate this, and we'll focus on Sundays and maybe getting an early morning mass. And it occurred to me very early on, maybe it's because my uncle was a priest, my aunt was a nun, that I don't think it's possible to separate this. I don't know how. If you really believe the things that matter, how could you? It's part of who we are. Now, I'm very focused as a leader in being respectful of other people. And if other people don't share the same beliefs we do, I'll be respectful of that. But this is who I am. This is who we are. I don't think we can separate that. I don't think that's what Christ asked us to do. So I think the key thing we ought to ask ourselves, particularly in the world we're in now, is, are we doing everything we can as Catholic leaders? And if we're not, why are we not doing that? And it's very interesting, focusing a lot on leadership, and I write a lot about it, and I give a lot of talks. What I realize is a lot of people want to be leaders. You know, you see some of the issues we have, issues in the government, issues in the church, issues in you name it. And usually when we talk about all the issues we have, we usually assign there's a certain group of people that's going to solve these issues. It's a little bit like I've heard today. You know, we've got all these thousands of students that need help, and somebody needs to help them. We all agree to that. And it's interestingly enough, having studied this a lot, there's a group of people that we usually assign that's going to do this. And the name of this group of people is almost always called those guys. Now, let me describe this term. This is a gender-neutral term. This is both men and women, but it's those guys. And I don't know who they are, but I think it must be somebody else. And I sort of have the view that everybody in this room, we are those guys. I mean, if we're not the men or women who's going to do something about it, who is it? And what I always ask leaders is 2 questions to think about. One is, at what point in our lives, you know, is it when you're 10 years old, like Madden, which he ought to be the guest speaker at Northwestern, I think, okay? Is it when we're 20? Is it 30? when in our life do we decide we are those guys? So if we say, oh my goodness, you know, a lot of the bishops and the priests, they need more help. Boy, it's too bad. No, what are we waiting for? At what point in your life do you decide that we are those guys? We're the men or women who's going to do something about it. Because in my mind, that's a very big part of leadership. Or the other way I sometimes think about it, and it's just a personal thing to reflect on, to pray about, are you watching the movie or are you in the movie? I like to think of it that way. Everybody's watching the movie. You know, we have these issues in Washington. We have these issues here. Boy, you know, I'm concerned about this. I'm concerned about everything, okay? Are you doing anything about it? Because I think that's the difference between people that are watching the movie and people that are in the movie, right? And I really do believe if we're going to get to where we need to be, where I think Jesus would want us to be, I think we just need to step up and do it. Step up and do it. And part of that, in my mind, and I always say, by the way, I always tell the students at Kellogg, Northwestern, I have very few answers, I have many opinions. There's a lot of speakers, they do Q&A, you know, question and answer. I do Q&O, question and opinion, right? And one of my opinions is, if we're really going to make the change that we really want to see happen, A, we have to be involved, and B, we have to significantly focus on educating the next generation. I mean, when I look at a lot of the things that are going on, I'm a very optimistic person, but when I look at a lot of what's going on in the United States right now, and I don't care whether somebody is right-wing, left-wing, or whatever, we've got this polarization problem that very few people truly take the time to listen to one another. And one of the things that I think a very strong Catholic leader does is they have a balanced perspective. And what I mean by that is that we take the time to understand multiple perspectives. And one of the quotes I like to use literally almost every day, I think it's one from St. Francis, is I seek to understand before I'm understood. I seek to understand before I'm understood. And I don't think enough of that goes on. If I'm having a discussion with Steve, and Steve has a different view than I do, okay, I try not to say, Steve, I don't understand where you're coming from, because I think that's actually ignorant. If I take the time, I can understand, and then I'll decide whether I agree or disagree. So this whole concept of I seek to understand. I want to understand why Steve believes something. In fact, I want to understand why Steve believes something for three reasons. One, I think that's what Christ would want me to do. Love your neighbor as yourself. I really want to respect him. Two, if he thinks we ought to go north on a topic, and I think we ought to go south on a topic, all right, I want to know why he thinks it's north. I take out a pen, I'm writing it down, and halfway through his discussion, I may say, you know what, Steve? Forget what I said about south. I think north makes the more sense. I think you're right. Why? Because as a leader, I have absolutely no need to be right. I am fanatically focused on doing the right thing. Third, I'm listening to Steve, I'm taking notes, and I start to realize, on this one, I don't think he's right. In fact, I think he's wrong. But because I took 20 minutes to listen to him carefully, he's not going to say to Suzanne, Harry doesn't understand. No, Harry understands. He just disagrees. And maybe because I took 20 minutes to listen to him, maybe he'll take 20 minutes to listen to me. So this idea of a balanced perspective, I think, becomes incredibly important. And the only way I know how to do that is I think it starts with our children. I think the whole reason why my 5 children went through 13 years of Catholic school, and then I realized when she was asking me about that, my wife went through 13, I went through 8 because there wasn't a Catholic high school in my town. I'm like 85 years into this, okay? And when I think of what we were taught and what we learned, why we're on this earth, right? The fact that we're here for a blink of an eye. We're here for a blink of an eye. And during that blink of an eye, what difference do we want to make, right? And again, because everybody in this room is very fortunate, right? And when I think of what the superintendent was talking about related to education, what could be more important than education? And again, just to be open about it, you know, we all have a lot of things we want to support. There's a lot of things that we would like to give to, but there is a little bit of this view of, but I have to make sure that, you know, I keep enough for myself, right? And I loved what Matt said. And actually, Matt, it reminded me of something that my father used to tell me when I was a child. Had a big impact on me. And I don't know whether he created himself or he stole it from somebody. I don't know how many have heard this, but I think about this all the time. Matt, what he used to say was, he used to say, hey, Harry, have you ever seen a hearse with a coffin in it, going to a cemetery with a U-Haul attached to it. And I'd say, well, Dad, what do you mean? He goes, well, Harry, 90% of the people I know, one of two things must be happening. Either they must believe all this stuff they're accumulating is going with them when they die, or they think they're going to live forever. Because if it wasn't one of those two, what are you doing with all of this stuff, right? And by the way, being part of it and a good Catholic leader is you realize, what's that comment, right? We enter the world with nothing, you leave with nothing, right? But since we don't focus on that a lot, there's a lot of us, we're accumulating all of this stuff, right? But then all of a sudden, you get to be 80 and it's like, what am I going to do with all this stuff? I got to get rid of it. It's like, didn't you realize you weren't going to be here forever? And so that ability to put things into perspective. So in my classes, I talk about being a leader. There's 4 principles I talk about. One of them I mentioned already, which is balance. And balance, I think, drives everything of literally the St. Francis comment, I seek to understand before I'm understood. The first principle, that's sort of the second. The first principle I mention often is being self-reflection. We would call it prayer, becoming self-aware. And why is being self-reflective and self-aware critical for a leader? Very, very simple. If you can't lead yourself, how could you possibly lead other people? So starting with yourself becomes very, very important. Now, what does that mean? I'll put it this way. Most of us in this room, even though I don't know everybody, most of us in this room, I would say, have at least 2 or 3 times the number of things to do than you're ever going to get done. I don't mean to disappoint you on a Friday. But if you think about your career, your family, your continuous education, your faith, your health, a little bit of sleep occasionally, a little exercise, a little fun, realizing since we're here for a blink of an eye, maybe we have a moral responsibility to make the world a better place while we're passing. There's a lot to do. Now, when you realize there's a lot to do and you may not be able to get it all done, the usual reaction is, well, I'll just go faster and faster. That's where the multitasking cuts in, right? And then, of course, we got all these devices, right? Blueberries, Blackberries, iPhones. And the great lie about these things, it'll make us more productive. I'm actually convinced it won't make us more productive. It'll make us more active. But we're active, how productive are we? Or we're moving so fast, we have no idea how productive we are. Let's just keep moving. And I think the very first thing that a Catholic leader does is take the time to pray and reflect. What does that mean to me? It means you take a short amount of time, you don't have a lot, you take a short amount of time, you turn off the devices, you get off by yourself, maybe it's a special place in the house, maybe it's stopping by church, whatever, and asking yourself what I think are some pretty serious questions. Questions like the following. What are my values? What is my purpose? What really matters? This is not an advertising campaign. This isn't a job interview. You're by yourself, maybe significant other. What really matters and why? Now, it's interesting, when I mention this to leaders, and I kind of do this all around the world, often somebody will say, Harry, sounds like a great idea. I mean, that sounds super. The problem is, I don't have the time. I don't have the time to do this. And my challenge is it we don't have the time, or is this something we really don't want to do? Because this could get very confusing, right? This could be a little controversial because there could be a pretty big difference between what I say is important and what I'm actually doing. And I don't know if I want to take that on. That's a little too close to home. But we're talking about leaders. Leaders are willing to challenge themselves. Leaders are willing to put themselves out. That's what leaders do. And when we say we don't have the time, again, let's be honest, most of us commute someplace. A lot of us try to exercise. You can do this when you're taking a walk. Some people actually, hopefully, pray. I mean, is it we don't have the time, or is it something we don't want to do? Now, it's kind of fun because I'm in a secular university, Northwestern, and some of the students will say, well, what does that mean? What do you actually do? And I'll say, well, I'll mention what I do, but there's an infinite number of ways to do this. Some of you may have gotten up in the morning, taken a walk, done your prayers. I'm one of these late night people. Maybe it's a combination of 5 children, a lot of teaching, a lot of boards. I take 15 minutes at the end of every day and do a personal self-examination, following the spiritual exercises of St. Loyola. And mine goes like this. It's only 15 minutes. What did I say I was going to do today? What did I actually do? What am I proud of? What am I not proud of? How did I lead people? How did I follow people? If I lived today over again, what would I have done differently? And then the last one is, if I have tomorrow, being fully well aware that sooner or later I won't, but if I do have tomorrow, based on what I learned today, how will I change my life tomorrow? In my case, being a better father, being a better Catholic, being a better spouse, being a better leader, whatever that means to any one of you. It literally puts things into perspective. Puts things into perspective. So, and that ability to start to lead myself really helps me then lead others and be an example for other people. Because as we all know, those of us that have run organizations, we can say a lot of things, but people really don't listen to what you say. I always quote in my class, I think it's Andrew Carnegie, the steel industrialist, who said, the older I get, the less I listen to what people say, the more I watch what they do, okay? Or the other quote that I don't even know the author, people don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care. So literally getting my own act together through self-reflection and prayer, now I can be an example and I can have a big impact. And if I get my balance together and that perspective together, the influence I can have on other people is enormous. Which gets me to the third one, which is true self-confidence. And I think it's really important for Catholic leaders to have true self-confidence. And sometimes people say, well, what's the true? You're either self-confident or you're not. And I always have to remind people, there are many people floating around who can act very self-confident, who have no self-confidence at all. I'm not talking about that. I'm asking a very personal question. Do you have true self-confidence? And the way I think about true self-confidence is, you know the skill set that God gave us, you know what you're good at, and you know some of the things you're not that good at. You're sort of comfortable in your own skin, and you realize it's a journey. See, it's very interesting in my mind. Sometimes when I talk to groups that are leaders, they'll say, oh, I'm a leader. I've got people reporting to me. And I always tell people, in my mind, leadership isn't a destination. It's a journey. Every day I'm on this earth, I think I'm called to get better than the day before. It's a journey. Now, as we all know, sometimes it's 2 steps forwards, 3 back, but it's a journey. And on that journey, am I developing true self-confidence? And I always instruct leaders, if you really want to think about this and reflect on it, if you want to know, hey, do I have true self-confidence? Here's 2 questions you can ask yourself, and your teams, because I try to be very practical. Here's the first question you can ask yourself. Have you reached a point yet in your life where you're comfortable to say, I don't know. I don't know. Matt, I don't know, but if you're my boss, you tell me how fast you need an answer. I know somebody who does. I don't know the answer, and I'll just admit it. Are you willing to admit you don't know? Second question, have you reached a point in your life where you're comfortable to say, I was wrong? Forget what I said. What Elizabeth said makes more sense. Let's do that. Are you willing to admit you were wrong? Now, some people have very, very complicated leadership models. My leadership model, if you want to jot it down, is basically 3 words. Leadership, influence, relate. Leadership, influence, relate, okay? Because leadership has nothing to do with titles and organizational charts, right? Leadership has everything to do with the ability to influence people, and the only way you can influence people is you have to be able to relate to people, right? So if I can relate to you, maybe I can influence you and lead you. So this ability to uniquely relate to every person is an enormous part of leadership, right? Well, if it's leadership, influence, relate, then I say, well, why is it that many of us don't want to admit we don't know, and we don't want to admit that we were wrong? Well, I think it's because if Steve's my boss and he asks me a question, I say, well, geez, if I don't know, what's Steve going to think about me? All right, I want Steve to admire me. Well, let's think about it. Leadership, influence, relate. Here's a key point. Most people do not relate well to people who know everything. In fact, most people don't relate well to people that never make a mistake. I don't know how to relate to these people. But if Steve says, Harry, what's the answer to this? I said, Steve, you tell me, I'm looking at my watch, you tell me how fast you need an answer. I don't know, but I know somebody who does. And I was very lucky in my career. The fellow who was one of the founding people for Baxter Healthcare, when I was a mid-level person, he took me into his office. And I think this is true for everybody in this room. He said, Harry, any job you're in the rest of your life, the rest of, it doesn't matter what your profession, doesn't matter what your job is. He said, any role you're in the rest of your life, there's only two things you ever have to know. I said, Mr. Kraemer, what's that? He said, the first thing you have to know is, what are you really good at? What are your God-given gifts? What are your strengths? Could be analytical, could be people. What are you really good at that God's given you? That's the first thing you have to know. He said, Harry, the only other thing you ever have to know in any job is who knows what you don't know. I said, Mr. Graham, this is going to work out perfect. I got about 40 people who know what I don't know. I keep them very close. You know what you know, and you know what you don't. Now, you may ask, boy, this sounds pretty simple. I think it is. But where does this fall apart? Well, I have talked to CEO groups a lot. And one CEO said to me, you know, I read your books. You know, this self-reflection, self-aware, pretty deep. I got it. Balance, I get it. This true self-confidence thing, I got a real problem. I got a real problem. I said, Ted, what's the problem? He said, I got 800 people working for me. There's no way I want them to know what I don't know. I hold my cards very close to the vest. I'm not going to divulge what I don't know. What do you think about that? And of course, I'm the one who's got to explain to this guy. They already know what you don't know, okay? They wonder whether you know what you don't know, okay? All right? And if you want to relate to people, you know, the faster you can do that, the better, right? Now, I always have a little fun with this because I have some of these students who are a little younger, and then one young woman said, have you always been willing to admit what you don't know, or is that something, you know, when you became a vice president? I said, no. Right out of Northwestern, I decided I want to be able to relate to people, and most people who relate to people are pretty good at being able to admit what they don't know. She said, well, give me an example. I said, well, things I know, if it has anything to do with numbers, I was a mathematics major, so if it has numbers, I know it. But if it has anything to do with mechanics, I have no knowledge at all. She said, give me an example. I said, well, if somebody asks me, what kind of heat do you have in your house? I have hot heat in my house, okay? I've never been in the basement of my house. There's something cooking down. But every room of my house, I have a thermostat. I have the telephone number for the heating guy right there. I know what I know what I don't know. And my wife, Julie, loves to tease me at parties like this. She'll say, oh, I want to introduce you to my husband, Harry. He's the only person I've ever met who, when he flushes a toilet, he thinks it's a miracle, okay? I think it is a miracle. I do, okay? Now, I have a plumber. I send that guy a box of candy. I know what I know what I don't know. True self-confidence, okay? Because people know what you don't know anyway. The last one, which I think is so we have self-reflection, balance, true self-confidence. Fourth and final one is genuine humility, okay? Genuine humility. I never say self-confidence without true. I never say humility without genuine, right? Now, what some student will almost say is, well, how do you know if you have genuine humility? And if you think you have it, do you really have it? Good question. So I had to come up with another question. By the way, feel free to use this question in a self-reflection for yourself, with your team, with somebody you're trying to hire. This is a great question. Very simple question. Everybody in this room, you've accomplished a lot. You've been very blessed. Key question. How did you get to where you are so far in your career? How did you get to where you are so far in your life? The top two responses, this will surprise to me. The top two responses, young people, intermediate, senior people. Harry, how did I get to where I am? I worked very, very hard, number one. Number two, I have several skill sets. And the combination of working hard and skill sets, that's how I got to where I am. Okay, now, if you asked me quickly, how did I get to where I am, and I wasn't self-reflective, I wasn't prayerful, I forgot my spiritual exercises, I'd say, I worked pretty hard, I have several skill sets. Those of us that are a little self-reflective may have a few more. I'll give you 5 that have impacted my career, and you can decide whether any of these have impacted your career at all. Number 1, luck. Let's pause a moment on luck. I was a pretty lucky guy. Number 2, timing. Being in the right place at the right time, okay? Now, some of my Baxter friends combine luck and timing. I don't. I don't know if this has happened to anybody in this room, but there were several times I got promoted. The person who was in the job before me, when they were in the job, they accomplished nothing. You replace those people, you look like you walk on water, okay? I even said one time, I'm just breathing. Harry, big improvement over the last guy who was in the job. Number 3, the team. Now, this one is really important, I think, for our educators because I think, and I tell this to my 5 children, when you're in school, there's this tendency to be kind of focused on you, your grade point average, getting ready for college, how bright you are. But those of us who have been around for a while know that works for maybe the first 4 or 5 years of working. And even if by that point in time you can do the work of 2 or 3 people, the problem is you can't do the work of 20 or 30 people. So the faster you realize it's not about you, it really isn't about you, it's all about the team. Are you motivating the team? Are you developing the team? Are you setting the values for the team? And if you got a great team, you're going to do pretty well. Luck, timing, the team. The 4th one, mentors, sponsors, okay? I mean, in my case, there were several people. If it wasn't for those people, there's no scenario I would have been in these jobs. 0. You never forget the people who got you there, and maybe, paying it forward, we have a moral responsibility to help the people behind us. And then the last one, which, by the way, I'm teaching in a secular university, so I make this number 5. Everybody in this room knows it's number 1, which is every single thing I have is a gift from God, all right? These are talents I've been given. It's not about me. It's not about us. And when you realize that, that changes everything, all right? And I usually tell the folks, if any of those work for you, I tell the students, if any of those work for you, luck, timing, the team, mentors, a relationship with God, if any of those work for you, what usually happens is the leader will start to say, 1, you never forget where you came from, because many of us start off with very little or nothing. You keep things into perspective, and as we all know, the higher you go up in an organization, the higher you go up, there better be a few people who knew you before you became a big shot. Because on the way to becoming a big shot, there will be people, it's happened to me, will come up to me and say, Harry, you're amazing. Harry, you're remarkable. If Harry's not very careful and pretty prayerful, he could actually believe it, right? Why is that a problem? Go to the model one more time. Leadership, influence, relate. Most people do not relate well to egomaniacs, okay? They don't. So never forgetting where you came from. And by the way, I always say genuine humility, because way too many people talk about, oh, I care about everybody. But then you watch what they do, and you realize it's mostly a lot of talk, right? And I take this relate word very seriously. So I'll end with what I always ask when groups, I won't have you do this, but you can pretend you are. I ask the group, how many of you really, truly want to be leaders? Of course, everybody raises their hand. How many of you think you actually relate well to people? Everybody raise their hand. I said, now don't raise your hand this time. This could be a little annoying. When you walk into the building, how many of you know the name of the receptionist? When you go into the cafeteria, how many of you know how many children they have, what their favorite sport teams are? And then if you happen to be there late at night, because sometimes we're working late at night, and the cleaning crew comes in, how many of you take 5 minutes, empty out a trash basket, thank them for what they're doing? For me, taking that 5 minutes, if I'm honest about it, has nothing to do with necessarily being helpful to that maintenance person. It's a moment of self-reflection, prayer for me, because what it reminds me of is what I call the obvious. If it wasn't for luck, timing, the team, mentors, and especially the gifts I've gotten from God, I could easily be part of the cleaning crew. I'm under no illusion whatsoever. So we're very, very blessed. We're very, very fortunate. A lot of these children really need a lot more support, and there's a lot more of these teddy bears floating around. And what I would literally say is, what difference can you make? And I really do appreciate everybody taking the time to do that. And the last comment I'd make, no pressure on anybody here. You are those guys, so good luck.